Wyoming Territory, 1871. The wind screamed across the plains like a dying animal, low and long, clawing through the cottonwoods and stirring the loose snow into spectral whirls. Beneath a pale winter sun, Clara Walsh stood in silence by a shallow grave, her thin dress no match for the bitter cold. The wooden cross at her feet bore no name, just a worn cavalry pin nailed into the grain, the only thing left that hadn't been taken by rot or rust. She didn't cry. The tears had dried up days ago, spent on prayers that had gone unanswered, on fevered pleas while her husband's body convulsed with pain, his skin slick with infection and sweat. Now he was still, finally at peace, and Clara felt only the echo of absence. Her hand drifted to the child clinging to her skirt. Eli sniffled, his small face reddened by wind and cold, his breath forming little clouds. "Is Papa sleeping?" Clara knelt, pulled him close, burying his face in the threadbare shawl around her shoulders. "Yes, darling. He's sleeping now." A snort of hooves on packed snow. Clara turned as the wagon behind her shifted, the two figures on horseback watching in silence. Henry Walsh Sr., her father-in-law, was stone-faced, draped in a buffalo hide, his boots polished, his gloves stitched with silver thread. His younger son, Charles, leaned against the saddle horn, chewing a sprig of tobacco, his eyes narrow and calculating. "You've had time to say goodbye," Henry said, his voice like dry wood splitting. "I need help," Clara replied, standing. Her voice trembled, not from fear but fatigue. "There's no food. The mule's too weak to haul the wagon. Eli, he needs warmth, shelter." Henry's lip curled slightly. "You were never prepared for this land. My son made his bed when he married a schoolgirl from Boston. And now he's in it." Clara swallowed hard. "He was your blood. And you're not," he snapped. "And that boy, he's got soft hands and city eyes. He won't last. Should have left with the preacher months ago." Charles smirked. "Let's not waste daylight, Pa." Henry tossed a small bundle to the snow. "A blanket. Nothing more." He pulled his horse around without another word. Charles gave Clara a mocking salute before wheeling after him. Within minutes, they vanished beyond the ridge, leaving behind nothing but hoofprints and silence. Clara stared after them until they were gone. Then she knelt, picked up the blanket, and wrapped it tightly around Eli. Her fingers trembled. She pressed them to her lips to keep them warm, then turned to the wagon, broken axle leaning like a lame leg. She tried not to let Eli see her panic. By dusk, she had gathered what little she could, 2 cracked jars of beans, a half-empty tinderbox, and a rusted hatchet. The cold deepened, creeping through her boots and bones alike. Clara built a pitiful fire from damp wood and frozen moss, managing a weak flame. She fed Eli spoonfuls of beans and cradled him against her. His breathing slowed, but the rattle in his lungs worried her. The wind howled louder now, rising and falling like the cries of something ancient and cruel. Wolves, maybe. She couldn't tell. Every sound in the dark was a threat. The wagon offered no protection, its canvas torn and brittle. She dared not sleep. She thought of her husband, Thomas. How he used to carry Eli on his shoulders through the pines, how he'd build roaring fires and tell stories of far-off places. A logger by trade, he had hands like bark and eyes like ash. She remembered how he'd looked at her when they met, a soldier too young to be wise, and how he'd promised her a life of freedom under the wide western sky. Instead, he'd given her this, a grave dug with her own hands, a child too young to understand grief, and a future that ended with the setting sun. The fire sputtered. The wind rose. Clara pressed her hand against her belly, empty, and held Eli close. Her mind turned to desperate thoughts. Should she try to walk to the nearest town? 10 miles, maybe more. With Eli sick and the snow waist high, they wouldn't make it halfway. A sharp cry echoed through the trees. She tensed. The fire crackled. Eli stirred. Another sound, branches snapping. Her heart pounded. She reached for the hatchet, gripping it with trembling fingers. Nothing moved beyond the firelight, but something, someone, was out there. She didn't sleep that night. She watched the tree lean, eyes burning, body stiff and cold, jaw clenched tight against chattering teeth. Morning came like a stranger. The sky was white, heavy with snow. Clara opened her eyes to find Eli still breathing, his body curled into hers. She whispered a prayer, voice hoarse, and slowly stood. Her legs felt brittle, like they might snap. Then she saw it. Tracks. Footprints. Human. They circled the wagon. Not boots like Henry's or Charles's, these were moccasins, wide-set, worn. There was no trail leading in. No trail leading out. She scanned the woods. Nothing. But the fire had been rekindled. She could tell. The embers were brighter. And beside it, carefully placed, was a rabbit. Skinned, cleaned, still warm. Her breath caught in her throat. Someone had been here. Had watched them. Had helped them. She took the rabbit, hesitated, then began to cook it. Eli woke with a weak smile when the scent of meat reached him. That night, Clara dared to hope. She wrapped Eli in both blankets, laid him near the fire, and stepped to the edge of the woods. "I know you're there," she said quietly, her voice just above a whisper. "Thank you. For the food. For the fire." Silence answered her. But she felt it, eyes on her. She returned to the fire and sat with Eli, cradling him as he slept. The meat warmed her belly, gave her strength. The next morning, there was a bundle near the tree line. Dried berries. A small pouch of powder, cornmeal, maybe. And a flint striker, better than her own. Clara looked up, scanning the trees. She caught the briefest flicker, a tall figure, motionless between the trunks. Bearded. Heavy coat. Watching. Then gone. She didn't chase. Didn't shout. Just whispered, "Thank you," and returned to the fire. In the days that followed, the stranger left more gifts. A carved wooden cup. A roll of linen bandages. Salt. Each item placed with care, without a trace of the man who delivered them. And Clara, day by day, began to hope again. She still had no plan, no map, no promise of safety. But the land had offered her an ally. Silent. Unseen. And maybe, just maybe, not entirely unkind. The forest remained still, but no longer felt so empty. Clara clutched Eli closer that night, her eyes lingering on the shadows just beyond the firelight. "Who are you?" she whispered into the dark. The woods gave no answer. But deep within, a hawk cried overhead, and the silence that followed no longer felt so cruel. Snow softened the sound of Clara's steps as she walked into the forest, the child in her arms heavier with each day that passed. Eli's fever hadn't broken. His breath came in short, rasping puffs, his cheeks flushed with heat despite the cold air. The rabbit meat and dried berries had bought them time, but not enough. The storm gathering above promised worse. She didn't know what she hoped to find, just that sitting still meant dying. So she followed instinct and kindness, praying they belonged to the same source. She followed the pattern of the gifts, each left closer than the last. Whoever the stranger was, he wasn't hiding by accident. The trees thickened, their branches clawing at her sleeves. Still, she pressed on. The wind had calmed, but silence now blanketed the woods in a way that felt loaded, like something unseen was waiting to reveal itself. Then she saw it. A small cabin tucked between two pines, nearly swallowed by the forest. Its roof sagged under snow, and smoke curled faintly from the chimney. No paths led to it. No fences. Just a small clearing, like the world had forgotten it existed. Clara hesitated at the edge of the clearing, heart pounding. She shifted Eli in her arms. He whimpered softly, eyes fluttering open. Before she could take a step forward, the cabin door creaked. A man emerged, tall, bearded, weathered like the mountain itself. His face was part shadow, part scar, his left eye clouded over. He wore a heavy coat stitched from mismatched furs, and in his hand, he held a rifle, lowered, but not forgotten. They stood in silence. Then, slowly, Clara took a step forward. "My boy," she said, voice hoarse, "he's burning up. Please." The man didn't speak. But he stepped aside. Clara moved quickly, not looking back. Inside, the cabin was dim, warm. A small fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting flickering gold across a room bare of luxury but rich in care. Everything had a purpose. A pot simmered over the flames. Herbs hung from the rafters. There was a cot in the corner, clean. The man pointed to it. She laid Eli down gently. The boy whimpered, then coughed, a deep, rattling sound that made her flinch. The man knelt beside him, placing a large hand on Eli's forehead. Then, without a word, he stood and began preparing something from a jar, a dark, bitter-smelling paste, and mixed it into warm water. He gave it to Clara. "Small sips," he said. His voice was low, almost unused. "Every hour." She nodded, not asking questions. Not yet. For the next hours, maybe days, time dissolved. Clara nursed Eli with the mixture, pressed damp cloths to his head, murmured lullabies that shook with exhaustion. The man moved silently, always near but never close. He left food by the hearth, fetched snow for water, tended the fire with a practiced hand. Eli's fever finally broke on the third morning. Clara sobbed quietly when the boy's breathing eased, when he asked for water, when he looked at her and smiled. She kissed his forehead a dozen times, then looked up at the man across the room. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know your name, but—" "Jonas," he said without looking at her. "Jonas Cutter." She tasted the name in her mouth like a forgotten song. "I'm Clara. This is Eli." He nodded once. "You've been watching us," she said. "Why?" Jonas sat at the edge of the hearth, rubbing a sharpening stone down a long blade. "Didn't mean to. But when the old man left you there, figured you wouldn't last a night. I didn't think we would." He didn't respond. She studied him. He looked like a man made of bark and stone, his movements quiet, deliberate, like a creature who had become part of the woods themselves. He had a rifle always within reach. A map on the wall marked with charcoal circles. A pair of moccasins too worn for pride but too sturdy to throw away. "You live out here alone?" Jonas nodded. "Why?" He looked at her then, his good eye full of something old and jagged. "Because it's better than anywhere else." That was all he said. Clara didn't press. She understood that kind of silence, the kind born not of shyness, but of wounds too deep for small talk. And so she said nothing more. Just thanked him again and tended to Eli. In the days that followed, a rhythm formed. Jonas said little, but his actions spoke. He showed her how to stretch venison with dried roots. How to check the sky for weather shifts. How to pack snow into makeshift ice bricks to preserve food longer. She helped where she could, gathering wood, cleaning utensils, whispering stories to Eli while he recovered. At night, she caught Jonas staring into the fire, jaw clenched, eyes far away. He didn't notice when his fingers twitched in his lap, or when he reached for a cup only to stop halfway. She wondered what ghosts he spoke to in his sleep, what guilt had driven him so far into the pines that only wolves and wind kept company. One evening, as snow drifted lazily outside the window, Clara sat across from him, watching his hands work leather into a boot sole. "Did you lose someone?" she asked gently. His fingers paused. "War takes everything," he said finally. "Left me with blood on my hands and silence in my ears." She nodded. "Thomas, my husband, he died 3 weeks back. Fever." "I know. I buried him myself." Jonas looked up then. "That's more than most would do." "He was a good man," she said. "We came west because he believed this place could be home. That we'd build something." Jonas looked into the fire again. "Dreams are dangerous out here." They sat in silence for a long while. The next day, Jonas took her to a frozen stream and showed her how to fish through the ice. His movements were calm, patient. He said little, but she began to read the small signs, the twitch of his brow when he approved, the way he handed her the rod without comment, trusting her. That night, she fried trout in the pan, and Eli laughed for the first time since the grave. Jonas allowed the sound to wash over him, unmoving, but Clara noticed the way his shoulders eased, just a little. It snowed heavily again. The woods grew quiet. But Clara felt stronger now. And not just in body. Something inside her, something nearly broken, had begun to knit itself back together. Jonas didn't ask her to stay. But he cleared a space beside the hearth for her things. She didn't ask him to speak more. But she listened when he did. One evening, while Eli slept, she turned to him. "You saved us." He looked at her and said, simply, "No. You didn't quit. I just helped." Outside, the wind shifted, stirring the trees. Clara glanced at the dark beyond the window and felt, for the first time in weeks, not fear, but anticipation. She didn't know what lay beyond this shelter, or how long the calm would last. But she knew one thing now with certainty. They were no longer alone. And somewhere in the pine-dark night, something waited, a storm, a reckoning, or both. But they would face it. Together. The tracks were fresh, boot prints, wide and deep, 6 in total. Jonas crouched beside them, his breath rising in pale clouds. The snow was still falling, but lightly now, not enough to cover signs this clear. He didn't look back, didn't speak, but Clara saw his jaw tighten like a rope pulled taut. "Riders?" she asked quietly, Eli clinging to her coat. 3 horses, 6 men," Jonas muttered. "Not hunting. Moving fast. Cutting west. Toward the cabin." Clara's breath hitched. "They know we're here?" He stood. "Maybe. Maybe they're just following the timber line. But it's not a chance I'll take." Her heart pounded. She thought of Henry, of Charles. Men who'd left her to die in the cold wouldn't flinch at finishing the job now. She looked at Eli, who blinked up at her, confused but trusting. "What do we do?" Jonas glanced at the sky. "We prepare." By nightfall, the cabin had changed. The warm sanctuary had become a redoubt. Jonas pulled up floorboards, revealing hidden compartments beneath the hearth. Guns, traps, powder. A veteran's arsenal. He moved with a grim familiarity, teaching Clara quickly, efficiently, how to reload the carbine, how to lace the snares, where to place the tripwire. Clara listened, learned. She'd buried her husband, survived the frost, and now lived in the home of a ghost who'd chosen to fight for her. She would not be helpless again. She stayed up late, whittling arrowheads for the crossbow Jonas had given her, listening to the snow fall in a hush too quiet for peace. The storm broke by dawn. Windless, quiet. The kind of day death prefers. Jonas stood at the tree line, watching. His rifle rested against his shoulder, his coat stiff with frost. He'd barely slept. Clara brought him tea, but he only nodded, eyes never leaving the clearing. "They'll come today," he said simply. And they did. By midday, 6 men rode in. Jonas counted them aloud, 2 up front, 2 flanking, 2 trailing, and Clara recognized Charles immediately. His grin was as smug as it had been when he left her to freeze. But now, he carried a rifle and wore a revolver at his hip. "They're here for Eli," she said, voice cold. "Not to help. To erase him." Jonas nodded. "Inheritance. Land, maybe. Or guilt they want to silence." Eli watched from the loft, quiet, holding a wooden carving Jonas had made him. Clara had told him this was a game, a quiet game, and he understood, as children somehow always do when danger wraps its cold hands around the home. The riders stopped just outside the clearing. "Walsh," Charles called, swaggering in the saddle. "Clara. That boy's got no future out here. Hand him over and we can all be on our way." Jonas stepped from the trees. He didn't raise the rifle. He didn't have to. Charles squinted. "You again?" Jonas didn't speak. "You think you're her savior? Some backwoods messiah? This don't concern you." Jonas took a slow step forward. "Everything that walks into these woods concerns me." Henry appeared behind them, older, meaner than Clara remembered. His face was lined with contempt, eyes like ice chips. "Clara," he called. "You don't belong to him. Or to this land. Give us the boy and go back east. You'll be better off." Clara stepped out from the cabin, crossbow in hand. "I buried your son," she said. "You left us to die. That boy is all I have." Henry sneered. "Then you've already lost." A shot rang out. Jonas fired first. One of the riders went down hard, the snow exploding around him. The horses screamed, the men scrambled. Another shot cracked from the trees. Jonas had moved, fast as a shadow, firing from cover. A second rider tumbled backward off his mount. The others scattered, trying to flank. Clara ducked behind the cabin, crossbow ready. She saw Charles moving through the brush, creeping along the tree line. He didn't see her. She waited, heart slamming against her ribs. When he stepped into the open, she loosed the bolt. It struck his thigh. He screamed, dropping his rifle. She ran to the next cover, reloaded with trembling fingers. Gunfire cracked. Jonas rolled behind a log, reloading methodically. He moved like a man who'd seen war from every angle and lived to tell no one. Henry barked orders, furious. "Find the boy. Burn the damn cabin if you have to." Another rider charged, but Jonas dropped him with a clean shot through the chest. Only 3 remained. Then, silence. The forest held its breath. Jonas crouched, blood on his sleeve from a grazing shot. He motioned to Clara, signaling for her to circle around. She nodded, moving like a whisper through the snow. Inside the cabin, Eli crouched behind the hearth. A shadow passed the window. One of the men had reached the back. The door creaked. Jonas wasn't fast enough. But Clara was. She burst from behind the man, striking his knee with a hatchet Jonas had given her. He roared, stumbled, turned, and Jonas was there. A brutal crack of the rifle but sent the man sprawling. The fight was primal, close. Snow churned beneath them. Jonas slammed the man's head into the beam. Once. Twice. Silence. Only 2 remained, Henry and one other. Charles, bleeding, tried to crawl away. Clara knelt beside him, crossbow aimed at his back. "You left us," she said. "In the cold. Like animals." He spat blood. "Pa made the call. I just rode along." She lowered the crossbow slightly. "Then you can ride again. Go. Now. If I see you again." He didn't wait for her to finish. He limped toward the ridge, dragging his leg, eyes wide with panic. Henry stood alone now, watching his empire of cruelty collapse. Jonas walked into the clearing, rifle aimed, breath steady. "You killed good men today," Henry growled. "No," Jonas said. "I buried bad ones." Henry reached for his revolver. Jonas fired once. Henry dropped. Snow swallowed the sound. The wind returned. The clearing grew still. Jonas lowered the rifle. Clara stood beside him, breath ragged. Eli peeked from the cabin, eyes wide but dry. Clara walked to Jonas, took his hand, silent thanks passing between them. Later, they buried the dead far from the cabin. No markers. No words. Just snow. As dusk fell, Clara stood at the edge of the clearing, looking out over the forest. Jonas joined her, quiet as always. "They'll send others," she said. "Maybe," he replied. "But not soon. And not the kind that make it this far." She nodded. "You could still go east," he added. "You and the boy." She looked at the cabin, smoke curling from the chimney, Eli warm inside, wood stacked, traps reset. "This is home now," she said. Jonas didn't argue. The snow fell heavier again, blanketing the blood, the tracks, the past. And for the first time in a long while, Clara felt something like peace settle over her. Not perfect. Not permanent. But real. She took Jonas's hand, just briefly. No words. Just a gesture. They stood there until the stars came out, silent sentinels in the night.